Good morning, everybody. You're very welcome to today's event. We're covering the topic of recruitment and retention with our partners in Adare HR. My name is John O'Donoghue. I'm the president of Fingal Chamber, and I'm delighted to welcome Ronan McGeolla-Fodrick, who's our expert in HR and employment law. So he's our guest speaker today. So you're very welcome, Ronan. So to give you a bit of background on the Chamber, we are the representative body for businesses in Fingal with cross-sectional membership of over 400 companies supporting 18,500 jobs. Established in 1994 as the Swords and District Chamber of Commerce, in 2011 we joined with the Dublin 15 Chamber and became the accredited chamber for the entire Fingal region. As the region's largest business organisation, Fingal Chamber provides a range of services with benefits that support business growth in a variety of ways. Firstly, we advocate and represent member interests, and we're the business voice to local and central government, helping members to influence decision makers and policy. Our head of affairs, Siobhan O'Donnell, is currently active on several issues such as the Metro, the North Runway, Fingal Development Plan, and other areas which include transport and housing, which are impacting the region and most of the country. Secondly, the Chamber's Networking Events Programme enables members to grow their professional network, connect with businesses, and build leads. A full list is available on the website if you're interested, and the new events are updated as they are planned. Thirdly, we promote the success of the Fingal Chamber SkillNet, where businesses can achieve results through collaboration and upskill their workforces through bespoke and subsidised training. Lastly, in relation to our offering and its benefits, the Chamber's busy export documentation service can assist users with efficient international trade, enabling them to expand their markets. Our membership is growing, and we now have members across every town, from Balbriggan in the north to Santry in the south, from Howth in the east to Blanchardstown in the west. Our members represent a wide section of industries and activities such as aviation, information technology, logistics, financial services, retail, agri-foods, just to name a few. So finally, if you think the Chamber can help, please reach out to us. We'd love to talk to you. You can contact us at fingalchamber.ie. We're here to help and serve the community. So by all means, give us a shout if you need any support in any way whatsoever. So thank you for listening. Hopefully that was brief, and I'm going to hand you over now to Ronan, who's going to take the session. Thanks, Ronan.
Thank you, John. Good morning, everybody, and it's a real pleasure to be with you this morning at today's webinar. On recruitment and retention. Just in terms of kicking off, John introduced Adare as kind of the HR experts. We're the partner to Fingal Chamber for human resource management, and we would like to consider ourselves as leading experts in employment law, IR, and best practice in HR management in Ireland. Typically, the way we help organizations is through our partnership program, where we help organizations make sure they've the appropriate contracts of employment, that their employment handbooks and policies are up to date, keeping you in the know and updated on changes that are happening in either legislation or best practice. And clients are typically assigned a dedicated client manager who'll provide guidance, advice, and support. And then if people really get into trouble, we do represent organizations in both the WRC and the Labour Court. By way of introduction, I just want to share with everybody, I don't claim to know it all. Probably collectively in this room, you know more than I do. But what I am hoping that by going through a number of key topics today, that it will act as a catalyst for you all, maybe to put something into practice after today and really focus on planning your recruitment processes and also taking an active approach to planning how you retain employees. I'm going to ask David now to do a very, very quick poll before we start into the material of the session for today. If that's okay, David, poll 1. So have you a current challenge regarding recruitment in your organization at the moment? And it's a simple yes or no. If everybody would like to complete that. Okay. Not surprisingly, 85% of participants say yes, they have a challenge with recruitment at the moment. And that's what we're seeing across our client base as well. In terms of the topics we're going to try and cover today, what is recruitment and retention? What are the latest trends in Ireland? How can organizations measure to see and understand how they're actually doing? Understanding a little bit, why do people actually leave organizations? And then how do we improve employee retention in organizations? And then at the end, then just to look at, you know, whether you're small, medium, or a large organization, you know, how to go about prioritizing. So what is recruitment and retention? In our benchmarking survey, which we call the Barometer, over 65% of organizations reported recruitment, talent acquisition, and retention as 2 of their top HR priorities for 2022. And we know high employee turnover costs organizations anything between 2 and 3 times the employee's salary, between recruiting, retraining, lack of productivity, and then the ramp up to full effectiveness and productivity of the new employee. So it's really, really important that we get this process right and that we recruit absolutely the right people in the organization. And we like to use this graphic just to kind of show there's the preparation stage, making sure we have all our collateral for the process, and that we're 100% clear on how exactly we're going to source candidates, where we're going to do that, how we're going to screen them, what are the criteria, again, what are the selection criteria, recruit them, then onboard them and induct them in the organization, and having a really, really clear plan on every one of those steps. One of the things we see as becoming more and more prevalent with organizations is trying to focus on what their employer brand is. So what is it like to work in your organization? What first impression are we going to create? What's the story of your organization? You know, what are the compelling things that people might say, I want to work with them? What's your purpose? What do you stand for? What is the role itself and what are the requirements? Important to note that you are an equal opportunities employer. And I think for me, one of the most important things, why you? Why should I apply for your role? And lots and lots of organizations coming up with very innovative ways of actually doing that at the moment. Sometimes we feel as well that by allowing a longer time for advertising and maybe reaching as wide as you can, it gives you a much, much better chance of getting the right candidates. Some organizations are using refer a friend type programs, which can be really, really effective if they're properly communicated and implemented. And I think really overall, when we look at employer brand, we're really, really trying to capture the hearts and minds of the candidates that we're trying to attract to these particular roles. Having a structured selection process is really, really important. And you know, we all have our natural biases when we're recruiting. You know, I like people with, or I don't like people who do X, Y, and Z. So either have a panel or use some type of assessments, whether it's practical things they can do like role plays or presentations, or even in some cases, organizations are using psychometrics to understand how people are more likely to behave in certain situations. And really, really important is to be tenacious around carrying out the reference checks and getting back the references from past employers. When it comes then to kind of the onboarding and the induction, we like to make sure that employers are reaching out to candidates before they start, maybe sending them a welcome pack, the role profile and what it's going to be about. And then really, really being structured when somebody arrives in your organization around getting the company history, clarity on their role, and then a 3-month review on how they're getting on and maybe some feedback, and then carrying out the probation process after 6 months. You may end up extending it to 9, and we would typically advise organizations not to extend it beyond that 9 months. But really, really actively managing that process. You'd be amazed the amount of times we get calls or contacts from clients asking us, how do we unconfirm this probation a week before the probation date is due, and no conversations have been had, which obviously presents a significant challenge. One of the other considerations when recruiting is, you know, some of the employment legislation in the background that's relevant. So firstly, we've got the Employment Equality Acts, which outlaws discrimination on 9 grounds in Ireland. And we've also got the concepts of direct and indirect discrimination. Data Protection Acts, so have we a data protection policy in place? And are we getting employees to sign a data protection addendum to their contract? And we need to be really, really careful in terms of protecting and keeping safe data we collect, whether it's in the recruitment process or after we've onboarded employees. Everybody is probably familiar with the National Minimum Wage Act, which obviously changed again at the start of this year. The Terms of Employment and Information Acts, where after 5 days, there are 5 basic pieces of information we need to have shared with employees, and then within 2 months of their start date, they must get an employment contract. The Employment Miscellaneous Provisions Act, introduced in 2018, was really brought in to tackle I suppose, disquiet around 0 hours contracts and put some parameters around those kinds of contracts where the work patterns may not necessarily be guaranteed. Protection of young persons, obviously if somebody is at school age, under 16, between 16 and 18, there are different criteria around hours, rest breaks, and rates of pay that you just need to be mindful of. And then we have employment permit acts when typically employees are being recruited who require some form of work permit to work in Ireland. And that ranges from this critical skills, general skills, spousal visas, etc., etc. The sanctions for organizations not following work permit legislation can be really, really punitive for organizations. So very, very important to pay close attention to those. So we talked earlier about, you know, we're going out into the marketplace and we're going to target candidates that we want to recruit for our roles. So really, really important to be mindful as well of the makeup of the candidate market that's out there. And I think a lot of us have heard these terms before, and particularly baby boomers Gen X, Gen Y, and Gen Z. And in terms of, you know, some of the characteristics that these different, I suppose, categories of candidate are looking for, you know, they range from jobs for life for maturists, who are typically people who were born before 46, and then work-life balance and personal well-being for Gen Z. And there's a whole range of needs there, and you can see the shift from left to right in terms of where that focus lies, from being formal, job for life, everything being face-to-face, to more phone-based communication, work-life balance, well-being, and not as formal in nature, and more hybrid or even remote in terms of the ways they want to work. Okay. And then in terms of retention, and actually before I do this, what I might do is I might ask David to hit the second poll for everybody. So what one main benefit does your organization have to offer as an employer? And maybe choose one of the below. Okay. Okay, 42% other, remote working, 33%, the next highest. And then we've got a smattering over between health insurance, life insurance, and paid medical leave. Okay, very interesting. So if we look at retaining employees from these various categories, you know, and just look at some of the wants. I'm not going to go through all of them. But if you look at maturists and baby boomers, opportunities to mentor others. Gen X, you know, opportunities for growth, responsibility, and want work and life balance, which is consistent actually over a number of studies we've done. Gen Y, again, flexible working, and they're more, it's about being ethical and wanting, I suppose, authenticity in organizations' brand values, and very, very focused as well on the area of diversity and equality. And then Gen Z, rewarding and meaningful work, diversity, equality, and inclusivity is there again, and continuous opportunities for growth and learning, both in the organization, but also in life. So if we look at some of the latest trends in Ireland, at Adare, we run a benchmarking survey. We used to do it every year once, but for 2021 and this year, we're running it twice, because obviously we were in a pandemic environment and things were changing so quickly. We felt that kind of one look at the market wasn't enough. So just in terms of sharing some of the outcomes from that. So recruitment and talent acquisition, #1 priority when we ran this in November 2021. Retention being #2. Expecting employee turnover this year to be 10%. So last November, they were saying in 22, we expect the turnover to be 10%. 62% of those organizations are planning on increasing their staffing levels. And 60% of organizations planning to increase salaries by an average 3.7%. We ran the same survey in April this year, so hot off the presses really. Retention is now the first priority, engagement the second priority, recruitment and talent acquisition is number 5. Expected employee turnover has moved or jumped from the expected 10 last year to 18.2% this year. So that's nearly a doubling of the expectation around employee turnover. And I think as employers, that's a warning sign to us all around the effort that needs to go into retention and also engaging employees. And organizations planning salaries to increase now by an average of 5.5% versus the view in November last year that it was going to be more like 3.7%. You know, anecdotally, there was a lot of comment around absence levels increasing. Last year was definitely driven by pandemic absence, whether it's the individual themselves or family related. But just interesting that there's a view of absence levels being higher in 2022 as well. So one of the biggest challenges at the moment is around the availability and skills and talent in the marketplace. And sometimes when that happens, and we've seen this in prior candidate markets, where organizations run the risk of falling into the trap of just filling a gap, okay? And who's ever heard that expression, we just need to get bums on seats. And you know, in our experience, and I'm sure in a lot of yours, you know, a less than ideal hire can often lead to further challenges in either managing that person or in terms of output or quality or fit in the organization. So when we've got a challenging market like this, it's really, really important to be creative. Lots and lots of article inches and social media posts on the Great Resignation. And, you know, if you look at the expected turnover levels in organization, like 10% would be high enough, but doubling up to 20, you know, that should definitely demonstrating a trend that there's an expectation of more and more leavers in organizations. So again, warning there, need to focus on retention strategies in our businesses. Some employees now, or I should say, they could be employees of other organizations. They're a candidate in the market. They can be in multiple processes. So we can have unrealistic expectations because the candidate, you know, has nothing to lose. They may be looking for less hours or a different work-life balance, or looking for hybrid only, or even we've seen looking for remote only, okay? And in some cases, even not only remote in Ireland, but remote anywhere, and that could be abroad. Active job seekers, again, can be involved in multiple processes, and using sometimes the process as a tool to get a counter offer from their own employer. And again, our research would show that counter offering can be an expensive short-term measure for organizations, but it's an understandable one, but rarely works out well, and typically is delaying the inevitable of that employee's departure. And again, one of the key takeaways from all of our research and from our barometer is technology is a really important enabler to the recruitment process. and speed is really important at the moment. If you're not back to an employee or a candidate within 24, 48 hours, you are more likely to have lost that candidate out of your process. So that puts huge pressure on organizations. And again, technology will help simplify the admin aspect of the process and allow you to focus more clearly on the decision-making aspects of the role. Okay. One of the other things we've seen as well is employees in middle of processes and ghosting the employer and the recruiter. Okay. So in terms of using technology, and particularly in targeting Gen X, Y, Z, you know, think mobile first where possible. Make sure the process is really, really simple and really clear. That any content is very, very easy to read, and share as much relevant information as you can. And as much as possible, try and leave candidates with no more questions to ask really about the role itself. Think of keywords in terms of people searching, you know, what are they likely to search under? And then some top tips when recruiting, you know, be really, really confident in your brand and your vacancy. And don't be shy around talking it up. Be aware around what your direct competitors are offering. And for certain roles, your competitors are not necessarily just your sector, but other sectors as well. Think outside the box in terms of how you're going to source candidates, and worth getting a little bit of input within your organization, doing a bit of brainstorming and coming up with some novel ideas. And keeping a talent pipeline. And I think this is really important, that organizations need to be recruiting all the time almost when it's a candidate-driven market, so that you have the opportunity to recruit people, maybe sometimes unexpectedly, while sometimes, you know, it's a planned recruitment. And certainly doing some workforce planning around when am I likely to need more employees, and to really start planning those processes well in advance. So whether a business is seasonal in some way, or there are particular projects that are coming downstream that are going to require more resourcing. And I think that, you know, the dipping in and out of a recruitment process is not going to serve organizations well at the moment. And it is a constant process. Whether it's creating awareness of your organization and what you do, your purpose, what you stand for, the types of roles in your organization, or specific types of vacancies need to be out and about in the marketplace, keeping your employer brand out there. Okay, so measurement then. We would strongly encourage organizations to focus on a number of metrics in their organization. So the normal standard metrics would be managing and measuring employee turnover, both voluntary and involuntary. So involuntary is typically end of a fixed term contract maybe, or you've unconfirmed a probation, or somebody is forced to leave for some other reason. And then length of service. And the reason length of service is important is it can really indicate a point to some important aspects of what's happening in your organization. So if you've got half of your voluntary turnover coming from people who are in their first year of service, you know, there's something probably fundamentally there that the organization needs to focus on. Is it people aren't clear on what they're supposed to be doing? Is it that the role they're doing is different to the one they feel they were sold? Or maybe they're not getting the proper support within the team to be successful. And obviously you're trying to build your length of service and kind of stretch them in each kind of service bucket in your organization. But that gives you really good data. And what it also does is it informs decision making. So if you see in the first few months of the year that your employee turnover is at 8, 9, 10% a month, you've really got to focus and add resources into that to try and stem it. And then in terms of feedback, get feedback from your employees via engagement surveys, to really get an understanding of what people are thinking and feeling, what people see as really important, and really give employers really good feedback on what's important to them. And, you know, if the organization focuses on those areas, more likely to have successful outcomes and greater retention. And there's this has become more popular in the recent number of years around stay interviews. And it's really spending time with maybe people you see as key players in your organization, strong contributors who've got service, and understanding what brings them back every day to work in your organization. What are the things they find really motivating? And what is it they really enjoy about being here? And really trying to, I suppose, capitalize on those things and make sure that your approach and your strategies and your policies are really emphasizing and focusing on those things. And building them into your employer brand as well. And kind of sharing, you've seen it before, this is what our employees are saying. And then also exit interviews. When people leave, are we doing a structured exit interview with employees to understand why they're really leaving? And while salary is often quoted as the reason for leaving, you know, it's rare that an employee leaves one organization and goes to another for a lower salary, unless it's a complete career change or something. So it's really trying to get into the deep reasons on why somebody has made the decision to leave. So what was the trigger where they actually answered the recruiter's call or replied to the LinkedIn they request about an interest in a role? And try and get as much valuable information as you can from that process. Socialize the information with the management team and come up with strategies going forward on maybe how to prevent that the next time. And just on employee turnover there, you know, the way most organizations calculate employee turnover is the number of leavers year to date divided by the average employee headcount year to date. And that will give you your running total on employee turnover. So we talked a lot about the recruitment process. We've talked about, you know, key tips in going about that process. We've looked at some data in the marketplace in terms of why people are actually leaving organizations. And more, it's becoming a focus for organizations on really understanding why people leave and what can we actually do to make them stay and minimize our recruitment needs during this phase of being a candidate market. So compensation, is definitely one of the reasons employees leave organizations. Is it the real reason? That is definitely open to debate. Work-life balance and flexibility, and particularly topical at the moment in the context of the last 2 years we've just come through, and the realization that technology-wise, working from home is actually a very easy thing to do. Is it the ideal way? I think the jury is probably still out on that, but definitely work-life balance and flexibility and feeling constrained is a reason people leave organizations. The way my manager treats me, the way they communicate with me, the way they support me, and the way they encourage me can very often be a reason somebody leaves an organization. And there is an old adage, which is people leave managers and not organizations. Employees tend to see their organization through the lens of their own manager. Lack of progression and development, or I was promised progression and development and it never happened. Recognition, and this can be the kind of contingent reward that doesn't cost any money. That was a job well done. Really appreciated your input. Simple things that managers can do to recognize the contribution and the input and participation of members of their team. And really couldn't see or understand where they were making a contribution to their organization. So again, it's really important to connect, I should say, what employees are doing and how it ultimately contributes to the ultimate performance of the organization. So we're going to spend a little bit of time now just on focusing on, how can we improve employee retention in our organization? So be interested, people on the session today have heard of the concept of an employee value proposition. And, again, it's what you stand for as an employer, and the psychological contract you create between your organization and your employees, the expectations that sets, and also the beliefs and obligations of the employment relationship. And I suppose, more succinctly put, it's about the internal lived experience of an employee when they're working for an employer. And EVP talks to a number of things. It could be compensation and benefits, career stability, opportunities for development or career, work-life balance, a working environment where the culture is something that people can buy into, witness, and see in action on a day-to-day basis. And that this culture that maybe the company states is their culture is actually seen both company-wide but also within their own team and from their own manager and their colleagues as well, of course. So really, really critical. And I think enhancing that employee experience is a really, really rich way of moving to retain employees. So do we have a really good onboarding process? Is it clean? Is it driven by the employer and making it really seamless for the employee? When they join the organization, simple things. Are there access to the various technology platforms ready and waiting for them? Is their laptop ready? Is any equipment, tools, collateral they need leave waiting for them and ready. And look, we see it all the time now on LinkedIn, photos going up of my first day on my job, and everything is set up there for employees. The probation management process then, so setting expectations. Are there clear expectations set for employees? And from the outset, diarising maybe a 3-month touch point, just as an interim kind of process to make sure everything is on track and that the employee is getting the support they actually need. Then, of course, the 6-month probation, which is normally contractual, whether clarity around whether you are confirming or not confirming that probation and following the right process to do so. Communication, lots of informal supportive communication at the early stages. Survey employees, whether that's via conversations or via surveys, but constantly getting input and feedback and understanding how they're feeling, how they feel they're getting on, and how satisfied and motivated they actually are. Be really, really, I would say, emphatic in listening and following through then on the actions you've agreed with people. Connect performance as much as possible to reward and recognition. Focus very, very heavily on the career opportunities. Maybe that's what they are and what they aren't. And the steps that an employee needs to go through to get there. And that, their development in the role is a joint responsibility. You as an organization have a responsibility, but the employee, has a responsibility to do their bit as well. And that's not a one-way sort of process. Social engagement, making sure that team activities are being organized, that there are opportunities for people to meet in a less formal environment, and really creates an environment to build relationships, get to know people, and really feel a sense of belonging to a team and a group of people in organizations. That's been really tough the last couple of years, but there is less excuse now for organizations not to be focusing on kind of that social agenda for the employees in the organization. And then on the ER side, deal with the difficult issues and problems that arise. So whether it's to do with behavior, whether it is to do with lack of delivery, whether it's a lack of quality issue, deal with them in real time, in as much real time as is possible, and address them and pave a way forward and a way for success as well. But really, really engaging with employees. And then some of the desired outputs then, I think, are that employees feel they have autonomy to do their job, but that the support is there when they need it. That the work they're doing is meaningful and making a contribution to the organization. That they have an affiliation and a connection with the organization they're actually working in. And I don't know if people have noticed, maybe when a new employee joins your organization, they will often use terms like, we used to do it this way, or we used to do that. And that's the affiliation they've built up with their prior organization. That they have flexibility within reason. That, career growth is something that happens in your organization, that employees embrace the opportunities that are there, and that they take ownership of their personal and professional development. That the leadership team in how it behaves, how it interacts and how it supports employees can be believed in by employees. That there's confidence in the company and the organization, and that people working in your organization ultimately feel appreciated, and feel recognized and rewarded for the contribution that they're actually making. Not easy to achieve all of these things. Some of them may be aspirational in terms of ticking every single box, but in terms of organizations creating strategies to get there, these are the desired outputs from those strategies, and really, really important for organizations to be focusing on those. The better we are at these things, the better we are creating these environments, the lower the number of levers we will have, and the less headaches we will have around recruitment. So when it comes to employment retention, we want to be an employer of choice. So hire the right employees, give people responsibility and authority to get things done. And that plays into the autonomy I was talking about earlier. People should be treated with respect and trust. And just on the trust aspect there, in this kind of more hybrid environment we're working in these days, that becomes an even bigger factor. People are out of sight, they're at home very often, getting through their daily tasks, and that focus on outputs rather than on activity becoming more and more important. Provide feedback on performance, which people enjoy and managers very often dread giving, but provide feedback. I noticed the other day during our meeting that you're A, B, or C, and use it to drive a successful outcome. Recognize achievement always. Don't miss the opportunities to recognize it, whether it's face-to-face or whether you use some kind of employee engagement intranet or engagement site or tool like WorkVivo. And then really, really push morale through dedication to making the employee experience as good as it can possibly be. And some of the things employers can do, maybe fit into the low cost, medium cost, and longer term and potentially higher cost buckets. Like showing appreciation for a job well done doesn't cost anything. Having a bit of enjoyment or creating a level of enjoyment at work. Easy things to do and don't cost anything. Bonuses on various levels for achieving agreed goals. Done well, don't cost the organization that much because the results are actually the key deliverable at the end of the day. And what some organizations do, they may enhance the statutory parental leave, paternity leave, maternity leave, things like that. Or sometimes they top some of those up where there is no obligation to do that legally. Okay, and then on the longer term, promoting work-life effectiveness and introducing flexible work policies takes a lot of consideration, a lot of planning, and a little bit of trial and error and testing as well, to be honest. And diversity and inclusion initiatives becoming more and more a priority for organizations that we're talking to. Okay. 10:21. So for small, medium, and large organizations, there's a certain degree of prioritization that needs to be done. And the scale of that, I think, very often depends on the size of the organization and also the resource that needs to be committed to get this right. And some of the aspects we would be suggesting organizations pay attention to would be planning in advance, sourcing opportunities, attracting the best talent possible, managing application and interview, and considering the tools or technology that the organization is going to use to really enable that. Planning the offer process and collateral, whether it's a letter or an email or a document. Really nailed on processes around onboarding, training, and induction. And they're pre-planned, they're in people's diaries, and everything is set up. And doing these things well will certainly increase retention. And more, we're seeing failure at these stages in the employee journey, leading to high levels of turnover at early stages of the engagement. After all the effort that's been invested by organizations, that's really difficult to stomach as an organization. So, I can't emphasize enough the planning and the cohesion in the process as a focus area for organizations. I'm going to ask you, David, maybe to put up the last poll now for everybody. That's okay. Do you have at least one valuable takeaway from the session today? And it's a two-choice option. And if everybody could just answer yes or no to that question. And then I'll move into the final few slides. %, that's what I like to see. Thanks everybody for that. I've got some suggested takeaways here. Get feedback from your team. What are we doing well? What could we do better? Review your recruitment process and really nail it down so that it's a seamless process from a candidate experience point of view. Take action to retain your employees, okay? Really important to focus on retention strategies. You learn so much by doing that well, and hopefully minimize needless employee turnover. Inevitably, none of us would have employees if people didn't leave other organizations, but in terms of minimizing it, and certainly in terms of controlling the pace of employee turnover, these retention strategies are absolutely critical. Okay. So I was just going to quickly just remind people of Adare's HR Employment Law Support Program. We've also got the Linea platform, which is a real treasure trove of articles, policies, template letters, forms, case law. A lot of the events we run are all recorded and saved here. Our Barometer survey is available here as well. And it's a really rich source of information for seasoned HR professionals, for company owners, senior managers and organizations. And also in the current climate, where we have a lot of remote working happening, or hybrid working even, health and safety obligations on organizations are the same as if they were sitting in your building. And we provide a very simple online ergonomic assessment training that meets your legislative requirements for people working from home. And do not hesitate to contact us if you have any queries or concerns with any HR or employment law issues. We'd be delighted to help you. And it just remains for me to say thank you. And we have a couple of minutes, maybe, if there are any questions.
I'll read out one for you, Ronan.
Yeah.
So this is from Fergal Malone. He says, when interviewing a potential candidate from outside Ireland, what should you look out for regarding scams, relocation arrangements, and if the hire doesn't work out?
Yeah, okay. So I think there's a couple of things here. The natural process of probation is certainly one aspect of, you know, if it's not going right, and that you have a legal option to be able to, following a process, to terminate the relationship through that process. What I would also do is if I was entering into relocation, and I've been there, I worked for an organization a number of years ago out in Swords where we used to relocate a lot of employees. We actually would put a relocation agreement in place and would really clearly highlight the T's and C's upon which the relocation agreement is based. The other thing then, in terms of people's bona fides and following that reference check process to make sure, you know, this person did work in this organization, sometimes you have to be really, really careful as well in maybe doing a little bit more research on the organization itself when it's from abroad, because I have seen that where some of the scams are very elaborate. They have the whole trail covered and manufactured, but it's really doing the due diligence on the prior organization that they are a bona fide organization that existed, and that also the references check out for them as well. And I think as well that due diligence will take a little bit more time and more effort when you're recruiting from abroad, I would say generally. The other part as well is I would be looking for evidence of permission to work in Ireland as well. And we have recently seen some very interesting developments in that area. And I without going into detail, certainly relating to the current Ukrainian conflict that's taking place. Interesting how opportunistic people who focus on these things can actually be in the current environment.
Thanks, Ronan. Anyone else have any questions? If you do, unmute yourself. No? Okay, Ronan, look, there was some fantastic detail. I thought the slides were excellent. A lot of interesting information. I particularly enjoyed the graphic showing what's important to the various generations from Gen X to Gen Z. That's very useful. And I'll be printing that and sticking it up on the wall. That's very useful. And it's interesting, the current market challenges. There are definitely some unrealistic expectations out there. And even the passive seekers is interesting. And as you said, they're more likely to leave in the long run. So you'd want to think about succession planning, which is important anyway, but I suppose react quick enough and don't wait till it happens, which was interesting. And the other thing that sticks out for me as well is staff surveys. It's so important to follow through afterwards. A lot of companies do the service, but they really don't take action, and that's hugely important as well. So they were just some of the interesting things for me. We are going to share the slides afterwards. So
Perfect.
I'll just check there's not anything else. No other questions. So thank you everyone for attending. Ronan, thanks very much. And David Brannigan's in the background who organised today's event. So thank you to everybody, and we'll see you at the next session.
It's a real pleasure. Thank you. And thank you everybody for attending.
Thanks, Ronan.
Bye now.
Bye all.
Bye.